Well, hello there. Today, again, we are on the Reforged test server to check out some new things. Unfortunately, Wargaming hasn't actually told us what has changed on the test server, so we've kind of had to go in there looking for things ourselves. And the first things that stood out to me, obviously, were the new tanks that are in the game. You'll see one of them on the screen here, but I'll skip over that one for the moment. And let's just get right into them. Now, these tanks are all tech tree tanks, and they are kind of fillers to pad up the tech tree and make them a bit more linear and, well, more in line with each other, because some trees have much less tanks, and it looks like, as you can see here on the American tree, they're kind of wanting to make most lines start at tier 6. Of course, you still get the odd few ones out, like the Ferdinand, but they did also pad up the VK tree, so it's not just, you know, a tech tree of 3 tanks. But let's start off with this tank. This is the M6/M-VII-Yoh, and you can see that it has the turret of an M6 with the hull of an M-VII-Yoh, hence the name M6/M-VII-Yoh. But I'll go ahead and buy this tank and we can go check out what is going on with this thing. So I will go ahead and upgrade it, and here you'll see the snazzy new upgrade system of Reforged. Everything costs credits. You do have the separate upgrades, but you don't have to do them in order. So if I wanted to get the top gun, I wouldn't have to actually upgrade the turret, which is kind of cool. You can see there I'm just upgrading everything all at once. It is kind of annoying though with all of these notifications that are popping up on the screen, but there we go. The tank is fully upgraded. Let's go ahead and check out what this thing actually offers. So this is a tier 6 heavy tank in the tech tree, coming before the M-VII-Yoh. It has 1100 hit points, which is pretty average for a tier 6 heavy tank, I believe. Hull armor 105. Not too sure how good that is, but it is angled back pretty well, so it should be actually pretty good. The turret is 162, which for tier 6 that is quite good. But you can see the hull size are only 55, that is pretty weak. For, well, even for tier 6 that's not great. DPM is very low, and this thing has a 9.2 second reload time for 225 alpha. However, that is without equipment. I should probably equip this tank and then we can actually see what this thing is kind of offering. Okay, now let's go back to the stats of the vehicle. 1144 hit points, again pretty average for tier 6. Its DPM is 1609, which is not great. An 8.4 second reload for 225 alpha. Sure, 225 hits pretty hard, but there's no reason to have such low DPM at tier 6. There's things like the Magnus, the M6 itself, not even mentioning higher DPM ones like the Kuro or the VK36. Penetration is very good, just like the M6, and it has a nice 10 degrees of gun depression. The thing doesn't seem too mobile though. It goes 35 with a 14 horsepower per ton, which is just average for a tier 6 heavy tank. So it seems like this thing will be pretty average in terms of heavy tank stats. I'm not going to play this one just yet. Let me know in the comments what you guys want to see, which tanks I should play. I'll play some more interesting tanks, but this one seems pretty average for what it offers. Next, that is it for the American tree. There are no other new tanks in the American tree. For the German tree, there are 2 new tanks, both of them in the same tech tree. The first one is the Kampfpanzer 3 Ausf K, which is a heavy tank in tier 6. So this one I already upgraded and I played it a bit just to kind of check out what it is offering. It does have tungsten shells, just like the rest of the line, but it doesn't get the special equipment which the tier 9 and 10 VKs get. This thing also does get sandbag armor, which gives it a bit of a boost in terms of how much HP it gets in game. And because of that extra HP, you can see it does have quite a healthy amount for a heavy tank at 1300. Hull armor is actually very strong, 170 for tier 6, that is in fact very good. It won't hold up to premium ammo, but that's not bad. Turret armor 180, again, just like the hull, is pretty good. DPM, it's better than the previous tank, 1700, not bad, does 210 alpha with a 7-second reload. I'd say that's a pretty comfortable DPM point. Sure, it's not anything super incredible, but it's not bad either, especially for having 210 alpha. Penetration is very normal, quite similar to the Kuro in that aspect, and this thing, it is quite slow. Its top speed, I believe, is 33, is it? No, it is 36. So the top speed is 36. It's not anything super crazy for a heavy tank, but it's also not bad. Reverse speed is 12, but this thing's engine power is really poor. It is quite slow in terms of its acceleration, so yeah, not the best on the mobility aspect, but a pretty interesting kind of heavy tank. Where do I find the set? Here. So the next tank in this line is the VK4502 P Ausf B7, which comes before the VK4502A, which is funny because it's basically a VK4502B, but in tier 7. Anyway, let's go ahead and purchase this tank and get it upgraded and kind of see what this thing offers. First, I'll unlock all the equipment. You can see, just like the previous tank, the Panzer III Ausf K, it does have that same tungsten, well, sandbag armor and tungsten shells, so that is something worth noting. Now, upgrading all the modules. Oh, I do in fact have to get the top turrets for the VK. I cannot upgrade to the top gun without having the top turret for this tank. That is interesting. So it does seem like Wargame can still implement turret upgrades, which are mandatory, well, for the top gun, which was a thing on the previous Blitz, as you would all know. But here we can see the fully upgraded VK4502P Ausf B7. It does have quite a strong turret for a tier 7 tank. 200mm is certainly not bad, especially considering some other tanks in tier 7 do have like 180-ish on the turret front. 140 on the hull, that is also pretty good considering it is angled back like this. It is just slightly less than the Tiger II, and that is a tier 8 tank, of course, so definitely not bad on the hull. Decent side armor as well. Its DPM is only 1800, which is definitely not good for a tier 7 tank. 300 alpha, also just not anything super impressive, and I believe I do have, yeah, I've got everything in the kind of maximum setup, at least for its DPM. So yeah, 1800 DPM, nothing too impressive, 10-second reload, but I guess that is pretty similar to the Juto, which also has 310 alpha with a 10-second reload. Penetration, nothing too impressive, and it does have pretty slow aim time with bad dispersion, but again, for tier 7 this is pretty normal. 7 gun depression as well, so nothing too impressive there. Its mobility actually doesn't seem to be the worst in the world. Its top speed is alright, and its power to weight ratio is of course very low, just like the previous tank. But for a super heavy, which I think this is, having a 34 top speed certainly isn't the worst thing in the world. What's going to be interesting is if this thing actually plays like the tank that comes after it, the VK4502A. So I will actually play one battle in this tank just to see how it feels, how it goes, because this one, I believe it is, well, a rather interesting kind of tank. And another thing to mention, 1700 hit points in tier 7 is actually quite a lot. Just going to turn down the game sound a little bit because it is quite loud. You'll see this is going to be, of course, against bots for the most part. There's only one player on the enemy team, which is that AMX. But I just want to kind of show the tank itself. And you'll be able to kind of get at least a decent feel for how it drives, how it plays in this battle. And you'll actually be able to see this thing isn't too slow. Its traverse speed isn't very good, but it does actually reach its top speed of 34, and it does seem to have a decent acceleration rate to be able to get there. But yeah, that traverse speed is really quite poor. And that is quite different to the tier 8 tank, of course, the VK4502A, which is very much a mobile vehicle compared to the one that comes after it, and compared to this one, I would say. But the thing that's nice about this tank is it kind of gets you used to the side-scraping gameplay of the VK tech tree, the VK72 tree. As, well, the VK72 technically doesn't side-scrape too well, but the VK4502B before it does, and the VK4502A to some extent can also side-scrape pretty well. But yeah, you'll see, as it is against bots, it's not the most riveting gameplay, and they do stupid things like just running away in the middle of a fight for some reason. But yeah, this tank doesn't seem too bad, honestly. It seems like it has decent armor, it seems like its mobility isn't the worst thing in the world. I would definitely improve the traverse speed, not the engine power on this vehicle, as the traverse speed is really bad, and acceleration seems to actually be alright. But yeah, you can kind of see this is basically just a mini VKB, the tier 9 one, in terms of how it plays, just down at tier 7. It's kind of cool that Wargaming has gone basically just made up their own tank to fit the tree, and it does fit it pretty well, as I'm pretty sure this definitely is not a real tank. But yeah, fighting against bots, certainly odd gameplay. I'm going to activate that tungsten shells now, doing 345 damage. But yeah, that's certainly an ace up the sleeve of this tank to use the tungsten. It will make that kind of poor DPM quite a bit better, and it will help the tank to trade a lot more, which kind of is a essential aspect of the tier 9 and tier 10 VK, just the high alpha trading, using that in the side scraping sort of gameplay that this tank does, well, this tech tree does have. Now it is 1v4, that does tend to happen in bot games where your bots just don't know what to do. Hopefully I can find some of these tanks and actually shoot at them a bit. But yeah, not much more to say about this tank really. It does just seem like a tier 7 version of the VK4502B, so not terrible job on Wargaming's part, at least on initial impressions. We'll have to see when we do get actually the proper model for this tank in terms of its armor. But yeah, seems like I'm now going to die because it is a 1v4, and even if this tank has amazing armor, I don't think I'm going to survive this either way. But yeah, interesting tank, I think. Kind of cool. But nothing too insane or too crazy. I did do 3,600 damage, but that's just because it is against bots. So not real players, just kind of showing what the tank is kind of like. Next new tank in the game. There's none in the Soviet tech tree, there's none in the French tech tree, there's none in the Chinese tech tree. But in the British tech tree, they have added the GSR 3301 setter, which is the light tank from World of Tanks PC, if any of you guys have checked out that light tank tech tree. But this is a tier 7 British light tank. It seems to have pretty, well, similar traits to other light tanks with 75mm guns, as in, well, it's got low alpha, but it's got a really quick reload, and you can see it does have the kind of same consumables as the Vickers line with that reticle calibration. So let's go ahead and get the tank upgraded. This one also does need to have the top turret to get the top gun. And there we go. Fully upgraded GSR 3301 setter. This thing obviously doesn't have much armor. It is a light tank after all. 1092 hit points is pretty normal for a tier 7 light tank. In terms of its armor, it's actually not terrible. It seems like it'll be pretty hard to HE this thing from the front. Even from the sides, that is pretty good HE protection in terms of its armor profile. Sure, AP, it's not going to bounce anything, but against HE, this thing will actually do alright. In terms of DPM, 2740, that is very good, as you would expect for a tank that only has 150 alpha, 3.3 second reload time. Quite good premium penetration actually, 215mm, and standard 155. Generally, light tanks in tier 7 have low penetration. That is nice to have on this tank. Gun depression is 10, very nice, and it has good forward speed of 65. So yeah, pretty interesting tank. I think I will play this one, as it is the only light tank out of all the new tanks they've added to these tech trees. And it will be kind of cool to see how this one plays compared to the FV-301, which is the tier 8 of this line.
Let's go.
Oh wow, this tank is tiny. Oh my goodness, it's so small. It looked small in the garage. I didn't realize how small it actually was. It is minuscule compared to that Type 62. Yeah, it's pretty agile, as expected as of a light tank. But pretty quick, that is nice. And you can, with the new equipment in Reforged, you can actually increase the top speed by 3 kilometers per hour. I just haven't for this video, just to kind of show you the stock, the base stats for all the tanks. But you can see here, this is the nice thing about these tier 7 light tanks with low caliber guns. They just shoot so quick. And sure, again, these are all bots, but yeah, you can see kind of how such a tank kind of has quite fun gameplay. Oh goodness. And the only real player on the enemy team has decided to come up this hill and kind of go after me. Hopefully our bot in the Type 62 will support me here. Oh my goodness, this tank is so small. So the small profile of a tank, not something you can see on paper, but it does actually help the tanks a lot for the most part in terms of staying hidden, being sneaky on the battlefield, and actually, well, avoiding shots. The AMX ELC 901 is a great example of this. But you can see this thing just have a tiny turret able to poke out against this FL-10, and you know, he's got to take that time to actually aim in. And this tank doesn't seem to have terrible HE penetration either, which is nice. But hey, it seems like this one will actually win, unlike the last battle, so that is nice. My word, maybe not the best idea to go out in front of 3 enemy tanks. Maybe we can get some HE damage on this Waffenträger. But yeah, this tank is pretty fun. I mean, kind of like the Bulldog or the M41D, of course. Having such a quick reload on a light tank is always a pretty exciting style of gameplay. But yeah, having that added kind of benefit of a tiny size profile is, well, it's quite interesting for how this tank plays, and compared to other similar vehicles like the Bulldog, I do like that tank. I think it's a pretty good vehicle. Sure, it's against bots, but considering the M41 Bulldog and the M41D can do fine at tier 7, I don't see why this thing should be struggling. Next, Japanese tech tree. Of course, other than the Type 5 heavy Type 5 Zetsu line, which I already covered in a previous video, if you want to check out that and kind of what that's about. There is the Type 3 Ho-Ni 3, which is a tier 6 tank destroyer going in front of the Cheeto SPG. So, go ahead and buy that one. Set it up with equipment. Not sure how much armor this thing has. It doesn't seem to be terrible if it's 130 at the front. equip all the guns, the hull, and of course for tank destroyers there is no turret upgrade, so that is good. At least they didn't overlook that. But yeah, this thing in terms of armor, 130 at the front doesn't seem to be the worst thing in the world. That's relatively thick. You should be able to bounce at least some medium tanks, especially the lower penetration ones. Camera rating seems pretty decent. It has really nice DPM for a tier 6 tank destroyer, 4-second reload time with 180 damage. This seems basically more like a balanced Jagdpanzer with maybe a bit more armor than the Jagdpanzer but less alpha with a similar kind of reload time. Decent penetration and premium AP with 233, that means that's very high penetration, that is very nice. Decent aim time, actually very quick aim time, 2.6, and 10 gun depression, that is also very nice. Its mobility doesn't seem to be anything too impressive, in fact that power to weight ratio is a bit low, but yeah, doesn't seem like a terrible tank to be honest, and it seems like a good fit in front of the Cheeto SPG. I think I will play this one as well, as it is a tank destroyer. It's a bit different to the other vehicles. There's quite a few heavy tanks in the new tanks they've added to the game, and I don't really want to play all of them, but I feel like the tank destroyer and the light tank are worth kind of showing, because they are a bit different, and well, they just play differently to heavy tanks, which for the most part, the ones they've added are all pretty generic heavy tanks. Average armor, average mobility, nothing too special in terms of the guns. And there are a few more which I will show in a minute. But here we go, battle in the Ho-Ni 3. Remember, this thing is tier 6, it's not tier 5, which I believe it is tier 5 in World of Tanks PC. I believe there is a player on the enemy team, but I'm not exactly sure which player it is. But yeah, you'll see here, this thing, its mobility isn't anything super crazy. It's actually pretty slow in terms of its acceleration rate. So I would honestly use the improved engine, well, the engine equipment. I've forgotten what it's called, but I would use that. It's not currently equipped on this tank just because I want to show the kind of base default mobility. But yeah, as a tank destroyer, I feel like this thing's gameplay isn't anything super crazy. It's not nearly as armoured as the Cheeto SPG. 130, and this thing doesn't really seem to be that angled, so it is going to be pretty easily penetrated by enemy heavy tanks. But it does have really nice DPM, which is quite nice. But of course, facing bots, what can you do? They're not going to be playing the most intelligent. You'll of course be able to use your full DPM potential against them. Having a whole TOG 2 to farm is very nice. You could see there, loading the premium ammo, what it did to the TOG's side. Then again, it could have just been due to the TOG turning his hull. Yeah, probably that. But yeah, this thing, it doesn't seem anything too crazy as a tank destroyer. Like I said, it seems like it's a Jagdpanzer 4, the German tank destroyer, with a bit less DPM, but instead of that DPM it does have a bit more durability in terms of its armor. I think it's HP, because the Jagdpanzer on its front is just complete paper. This thing with 130, it can actually be able to bounce some medium tanks, I believe, as long as that upper superstructure is the 130 bit. But yeah, 44 top speed. I was kind of struggling to reach that top speed for the majority of this battle until I was going downhill there, so I would say this thing's mobility isn't anything too impressive, which is kind of like the Cheeto SPG in tier 7, which doesn't have anything crazy in terms of mobility, but that thing does actually have very good armor, which I would say this thing is a bit of a step down in that armor profile. I'm just trying to see where the Stridsvagn penned me, but I can't see where that actually went in. Bit hard to assess without having the armor profile of these tanks, because armor is kind of one of the three main factors. But yeah, seems like a decent tank destroyer, especially if you're going to snipe. If this thing has no armor and you're sniping, it really doesn't matter. The gun is nice, and it does have really quick aim time, which is definitely good. So that was Japan. There's no other new tanks in the Japanese tree. Now, in the European tree, there are two new tanks. The first one is the P2640. This is a tier 4 on World of Tanks PC, and it is, well, for the historical accuracy people out there, this is the only heavy tank that Italy actually kind of, I think they built. But yeah, they've added it now to tier 6, so is kind of cool. A new tier 6 heavy tank for Italy going in front of the Caro P88. So fully upgraded there. Let's just add in all of the equipment. Has normal consumables, it seems. And yeah, so the P2640. Tier 6 heavy tank has almost 1200 hit points. Pretty normal for a heavy tank. It does seem to have really good hull armor. 140 is quite strong if it is this main angled bit at the front, especially at that angle. Turret is 200. Again, that seems really strong for a tier 6 heavy tank, but okay. The DPM seems quite good, but that is because it has 160 alpha, which is pretty low for a tier 6 heavy. It's kind of in line with like the Churchill 7 or something like that. Penetration also seems pretty average, nothing too impressive. But it has got nice aim time, which is good to see, and 8 gun depression. And it's also pretty quick, 42, that is nice to have, with a 15 horsepower per ton. So this thing is going to be a pretty mobile, pretty agile vehicle, which, you know, it's pretty similar to kind of how the Rinoceronte is in terms of mobility at tier 10, but this thing of course down at tier 6. Keeping in line with the Caro. It is not an autoloader, so that is something to note. Now the final new tank they have added to Reforged for the tech trees is this thing. No idea what this is called or what it will be called. Emil 74 maybe, because it's a Stridsvagn 74 on an Emil hull, but this is a tier 7 heavy tank. You can see already it does have all the consumables of the Emil/Kranvagn line, and thence the dead giveaway that this is an autoloader. Now I'm going to take that off so we know what its mobility is kind of like without that insane boost to the engine power. It is 18% now. They've changed it in Reforged to compensate for provisions. But tier 7 heavy tank, hit points 1508. That's nothing too impressive for a tier 7 heavy. The hull is 100mm thick. That's actually pretty decent. I think that works out to about 180 effective armor, so you will be able to bounce some same tier enemies. Don't be expecting to bounce higher tier tanks though, unless you are using your gun depression. Turret 150, that is, you would think that's not too good, but remember this is basically tapered into the front. It is angled very well, so that turret armor should be pretty good. The size of the hull, nothing too impressive. 55, that's pretty weak. Size of the turret, 100, that's pretty strong, which is kind of surprising. 2000 DPM with an 11-second reload. This thing is a 160 alpha 3 shell autoloader. So it's kind of like the Chiri, except instead of a 1-second intro clip, it has a 2-second intro clip. So its DPM, decent enough, but nothing too crazy. And it seems like, well, its burst damage should be pretty decent. 2.8 second aiming time, again, very quick. It seems these new tanks do have quite quick aim time. And 9 gun depression, which is very nice. 35 top speed, pretty average, with a 12 horsepower per ton rate. So in terms of mobility, it does seem kind of like the Emil-I up at tier 8 in terms of how quick the tank is. Because the Emil-I, it's not necessarily too quick, but it's not the slowest thing in the world either. But it's kind of cool that they've added this in at tier 7, because the Leo in the current tech tree just doesn't feel like it fits. It's a medium tank, it's pretty quick, it's got 290 alpha, and it's a single shot tank, it's not an autoloader, so it just feels weird going from that to a heavily armored, slow 3-shot autoloader, which is the Emil-1. So it's kind of cool they've added this thing in at tier 7 to go in front of the Emil-1. Also an autoloader, which should hopefully kind of embody the same traits. So yeah, this thing definitely not too quick, but it doesn't seem to be too different to the Emil-1 in terms of its mobility. And you do of course have that engine power boost, which allows you to get in and out of situations. But yeah, again, mainly bot battle, so don't expect anything too crazy from the gameplay. There are 2 enemy players, one in the AMX, one in the SU, so got to watch out for those, lest they try focus me. But here we go, you can see 2-second intro clip. It's not anything too quick, but still not the worst thing in the world either. I feel like they could have made the intro clip a bit quicker, but maybe like 1.8 seconds, 1.7 seconds. But the DPM does feel kind of low for a tier 7 heavy tank. Tier 7 is a tier of very high DPM, so only having 2k feels quite low. 11-second reload also doesn't feel super quick. Sure, it's not slow, but your intro clip is 2 seconds, which also is not the best for 160 alpha. I mean, at this tier, autoloader heavy tanks generally have much better DPM than this. For example, the Predator UM, that thing has 2.4k DPM. This thing is sitting at less than 2k. And the Predator has quicker intro clip, it has quicker magazine reload, it has better alpha, so that kind of goes to show what this thing is dealing with in terms of its DPM. I have no idea where that guy penned me. Yeah. It seems like he's penning right through... Oh, he's shooting the hull. So yeah, you don't want to get too... Well, you don't want the hull to be shot down on by enemy tanks, because that thing does rely quite a lot on its angling. So of course, if enemies are looking down on it, then the angle is negated. Yeah, hopefully this VK doesn't destroy me, that would be ideal. Luckily our Tiger P does take him out, but now there is an SU who does seem to be trying to kill me. Goes down to the Tiger 2, there's just an AMX left. But yeah, you can see this thing doesn't feel the best, to be honest. It's pretty slow, its armor, it's not as strong as the Emil-1. I think the upper plate on this tank is a lot weaker than the Emil-1, and the turret doesn't seem to be anything super crazy. It does have a cupola on top. And on top of all that, you know, its mobility is basically the same. DPM feels quite low for what it is. If it was me, I would give this tank a bit more alpha or slightly faster intro clip. Probably leaning more in the alpha damage direction, because at tier 8 the Emil-1 does have quite nice alpha for its autoloader. So maybe like 180 alpha instead of its current 160, which is, you know, is pretty poor for tier 7, especially to have 2-second intro clip. But it is cool that this thing does have the consumables of the Emil line. They are useful, of course, but it's kind of compensating for the pretty mediocre mobility that this thing has. And I would say it doesn't need reticle calibration. This aims super quick, so I don't think you need that. But yeah, I don't think this thing is anything too crazy. Kind of interesting because it is an autoloader, but I think it does need a bit of a buff to be decent for tier 7, but we'll have to wait and see for the live release, because playing against bots and not knowing the full armor profile of this tank, it is kind of hard to know, you know, what's going on. But that is it for all the new tanks. There's no other new ones in Vintage or in the Hybrid Nation. The only ones that there were the M6/M7-Yoh in front of the, well, the Yoh tech tree for the American nation, and then the Panzer III Ausf K for the tier 6, and then the VK4502 P Ausf B7 for the tier 7 of the VK72 tech tree. And then it is the Setter for the British light tanks, the Honi Type 3 for the Japanese tank destroyers, and then the two which I just showed, the P2640 and the Leo, well, the Sturizvang / Emil-I type vehicle for the European nation. But yeah, let me know what you guys think of these tanks in the comments. I think they're pretty interesting. I think it's cool that Wargaming has added these in front of the lines that they are, because they do, I feel like, fit those lines quite well in terms of the gameplay and what they offer. Sure, maybe some of them aren't the best balanced, but you know, you got to remember these tanks went in without any testing just to kind of fill the gaps. So I think it's pretty cool that they have added these more tanks to the game, especially texture tanks. That is quite nice, because nowadays it just feels like it's full of premiums and every new tank release is a premium. So new texture tanks, in my opinion, that's pretty cool, and I do like that they have added these. But yeah, that is it for this video. Thanks all for watching.